Okay, so here I just have a bunch of neutral yarns. This is just kind of my color palette in the winter. And just for practice, I'm just using some leftover yarn. But of course, if you're doing a project, make sure you have enough. The good thing about doing granny stripes or granny squares is that you can do color changes and you can just use leftover yarn. So an example I just want to show is, you won't see the full sweater, but this is kind of um, a granny sweater, granny stitch sweater. And this is worked in around and then in some areas in stripes. So today we're going to do stripes just to get a hold of the pattern. So a granny stitch is made up of 3 double crochets, and then you have a space in between. You have another cluster of 3 double crochets, and so on. And then in those spaces, you'll work the next row of clusters, space where you had a cluster, and then another cluster in the space. And you just keep going. And that's kind of the pattern. So it's fun to change color, or you can do it all in one color. I will show you both ways in this example. So first we'll practice doing just the stripes, and another time we'll work in the round because you don't want to work on 2 techniques at once, but working in the round kind of gets you something like this. And then we'll learn how to turn corners in another project. So I'm going to be using, this is acrylic yarn in this, and look how much movement it has. It's been steamed. So I'm going to use acrylic yarn, medium weight yarn. I'm going to go up in my hook size to 6.5 because that starting chain in when you're working in chains or stripes, it can get a bit tight, and so I'm sizing up. Usually you would use a 5mm hook for a worsted weight yarn. See how it says 5mm, and I'm going to use a 6.5mm. Just for this example, as you can see, there's a lot of space in between granny stitches. Depending on how much you chain in between, whether you chain or don't chain in between the stitches, how much of a gap you'll have. So sometimes you might want to size down or use a smaller weight yarn to decrease that space. But I like the airy feel. I wear this around the house, so it's nice to have some airflow. Okay, so I'm just going to chain out. So for a granny stripe, we start off with a chain with multiple of 3 plus 1. So whatever you're making, you can do a project, a scarf, a washcloth, a blanket. Just chain out to the length you need in multiples of 3 and then add 1. And so let's do our slip knot. And then I'm going to, just for this example, I'm going to chain out to 25, and that's multiples of 3 is 24, and then add 1 is 25. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then you do your length and we'll meet back. Okay, so here's my chain of 25. Make sure your chain is pretty loose. I held the hook back here to keep it loose. And now we're going to, so because the granny stripes is made up of double crochets, we want to start essentially with a double crochet. So we are going to put our first double crochet, here's the loop on the hook, in the 4th loop from the hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. And so we yarn over and we're going to go in there. through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and closer. So doing that gives you that, lifts you up to the height of a double crochet going to that fourth chain, and also acts as your first double crochet. So unless the pattern says so, chain might not count as the first stitch. In this case, in granny stitches, it does. So we essentially have 2 double crochets in 1 stitch, and that'll make more sense as we build up our rows. And then you're going to skip 1, 2, so that's the space between the clusters, and then work 3 double crochets into this stitch. So pull through 2, turn over, pull through 2, and then into the same stitch you work another 2 double crochets. Stitch. You see those 3 stitches in that. So you can see that little gap. So then we're going to skip another 2 and work 3 into that third one. 1, 2, so you can start seeing the formation of these clusters. And the reason this will stay straight and not like you're increasing in the row is because we're skipping 2 and going into the third. So 1, 2, 3, all 3 go into that third. So you're not increasing the number of stitches across, you're just creating gaps and clusters. So keep doing that all the way across. You skip 2 and then you do a cluster, skip 2, do a cluster. And I'll meet you at the last 3 stitches. Okay, so I've created my clusters. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's including the first chain and double crochet. So 6 full clusters. And so I'm at my last 3 stitches. And so I've done this cluster. We're going to skip these 2 and do 2 double crochets into this last chain space. So only 2, not 3. So the reason for 2 is because when we started with this chain and then the 1 double crochet, that's essentially 2 double crochets we're starting with, and so we'll end with 2 double crochets, so it's even. So you can see if you don't keep this starting chain loose, it'll start curling this way. I made these very loose as well, and that's why it seems like this is tighter, but now I'll start tightening up, or you can go down a crochet hook size for the rest of your project. So we'll work the same color for the next row just to show you how to turn. So at the end, so how we went into that 4th in the starting chain, the 4th chain from the hook, that was like chaining 3 to start here. So that's what we'll do here is chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and then turn like a book. And then we'll do in this is going to act as our first double crochet. So in this row, we're going to have 1 double crochet on each end. So you go 2 and 1. And so we're going to work our cluster into this space now. So that's 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. So you can see where I did that cluster in that space. And so then we'll skip this cluster and put a cluster into this space. A cluster of 3 double crochets. If you need a review on double crochets, you can see previous videos, and I've linked them all below on how to just undone my home thing. On how to chain, slip knot, single crochet, double crochet, and just review that real quick before doing this project. That's why I review this stitch before going in the round, because that's a whole other talent you need. So there's another cluster. So keep doing that until you reach the end, and we'll meet at the end and I'll show you how to change colors. Okay, so I am at my last space, and so we're going to work a cluster, 3 double crochets in there. And then just like we started with 1 on this end, we're going to end with 1 on this end. So this was our little chain here, and you can really just find a space in there, and should have shown you where to mark it at the beginning, but that's that beginning of that chain. So I'm just going to get into that space there, put 1 double crochet, and then our ends are even. So this is essentially our space for the next row. And then if you want to change color, you can really just tie this off, or whatever you choose. So there are multiple ways to change color. I'm just going to go to my next color. And so this was our last stitch right there. And we can just put this hook back in that last stitch, pull up this new color through there, and then pull this one through there, and cut this off. this old color. If you want to make a knot, you can, just so it all stays together. And that way, even if your loose ends come undone, you have a knot there. And when you do a border, it's not noticeable. Another way, I'll show you another way when we get to our next color change on how to change color. So I usually just carry this tail along so that I don't have to weave it in later, because we have our knot, we don't have to worry. And I've never had anything come loose really. So now we're at the end of the row, we chain 3, turn, and so now we're at this space. So down here we had 2, so here in that same space we want to put another double crochet so that we start with 2, and then we skip that cluster and we'll put 3 into that space. Okay, got it all untangled. So I'm just finishing up this cluster. And I'm trying to carry over that free end behind all my stitches, so then I kind of don't have to weave it in later. But sometimes it can look messy. It just depends. If this is the front side of a sweater or something, you can hide things in the back, but if it's going to be double-sided, you might not want to do it like this. This is just an example, so I just want to keep it free of loose ends. So just continue as you did in the previous row and just work a cluster of 3 double crochets into each space to the end of the row. Okay, so we're at the last cluster. So here, remember we started with 2, we had our chain, and then we put another one into that gap. So here, we're going to put 2 at the end. So remember we had 2, 1, and now we'll have 2. 2 double crochets into that last space. And I'm going to change color again. So how to do that. So again, if you want, go into that last loop and then just yarn over with your new color, pull it through, and then you can pull this through here. And then you can cut this. So another way so that you have no tails. So I've done that knot from the previous color onto the new color, and then I'm going to just pull this out and tie the new color onto the previous color into a knot. Secure, and then we just pull until they join. And this is secure. And you can really cut these tails right at the knot. It's like when you find the factory knots in your yarn and it doesn't come apart. This will not come apart. And so then I'm just gonna, whatever I pulled out, I'm going to crochet again. I just pulled out my last stitch, so I'm gonna put that back in. I'm gonna get it so I get this new color. And then chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn it. And then again, unravel this yarn. So as you can remember, we had 2, 1, 2, 1. So this cluster is kind of the cluster you're skipping, and then you're going into this space, you'll do 3. And the granny stitch is very forgiving in terms of if you make a mistake, you accidentally put 2 stitches or in here instead of 3, or 1 instead of 2 at the end, or 3 instead of 2. You can kind of finagle your way around it, make up for it. And so here, what's nice is we have no tails to worry about, and that's usually when I do frequent color changes. That's how I join my yarn, because the project itself just doesn't become fun to me when I'm thinking about having to weave in ends. So here's our next color change, and you can kind of see that pattern developing of your granny squares. And so keep going, and now you can just keep going in your project until you create whatever it is you want to create. Work with different patterns of the granny squares. So as you can see, sometimes it's nice to have 2 rows of the same color back to back, because you get this kind of checkered pattern. And then it's also nice to change with each row so you can really see each distinct cluster. So you can decide based on what kind of project you're creating. I think the fun of, granny striping or granny squares is the color change. So as you can see, my sample project I showed, I changed color with every row, and that way you can use up old yarn. This was made of all scrap yarns I had, and it just worked out perfectly. Even though I would not normally think to put all these colors together, it works when you're doing granny, because it's like their own little boxes, clusters that are on their own, and helps each one stand out. So once you're done with your project, then you can do a border, weave in ends. See how this is the back. If you are doing a sweater or some type of garment, it's good to kind of mark the right side of your work, so that you know which side to put in your woven ends if you are weaving in ends, and also so you just know when you finish up on a doing the border. All right, so I'm just going to work up a square of this, and then you create what you want to create. I hope you enjoyed this pattern. once you start in granny squares, before I did any type of granny stitch project, I didn't really see the big deal. But once I created something fun like this sweater, I was hooked. And once you can work with so many colors together like this, and really so many combinations you normally wouldn't use together really work with granny stitches and granny stripes. And that's what makes it so fun, or just kind of like a mindless project you can do on the weekend. Okay, so here's my completed swatch of the granny stripes. So I wanted to demonstrate what a big difference the colors themselves make in bringing out the stitch, and how alternating them just makes both the colors and the stitch stick out, and then using a contrasting color that's brighter than the others kind of brings out the stitch and striping and makes it look like little blocks. So you can just play around with that in your patterns. I also wanted to show you, so I played around with doing a starting, so if you're doing something like a blanket, you can see that going straight in with double crochets into that starting chain can kind of thin this out, and also makes, you know, this part curve down if you depending on your stitches. And I can tell my tension was different on the orange versus the others, and that's just because this, like this gray taupe yarn, is actually thicker than the white yarn, even though they're both rated as a number 4 worsted weight yarn, and both are acrylic. So I thought it was just because of the weight of the yarn, but then I tested it with a starting row of single crochet on the starting chain, and then I went into the granny stripes, and you can see how everything lays straight, even with the different weighted, well, different thickness yarns. And I use the same yarn in both these swatches, but you can see how straight this lies. So if you're doing something that's big and you want to avoid it getting wonkier and wonkier as you move on, I would say do that starting one, especially if you're going to end up with a border. You won't notice it. You can just end with a single crochet up here to make it even, and then you can do a single crochet border or slip stitch border. And so the way you would do that is, over here, our starting chain, we had done 3 plus 2, and here, or 3 plus 1, and here you would do 3 plus 2 because you'll lose one when you do that single crochet chain. So your starting chain will be 3 plus 2, and then your single crochet row will be 3 plus 1, and it will take you to the same count as here, 3 plus 1, and then you do the same pattern of going into the granny stitches. And so at that end you can chain 3, do your double crochet, and then skip 2, do your 3 double crochets, skip 2, 3 double crochets, and so forth. So same thing you did here. So I hope you are as excited about granny stripes as I was when I first started doing them. I love these colors together. It also makes colors go together by adding that neutral pop. It brings some cohesion. So the best way to do that is kind of this orange. This brown is a little darker shade of the orange, same family. And then you have the taupe, which is a neutral like a brown. And then you have a neutral pop, which is the beige cream color. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.